today. Given the hybrid nature of the event, we've got a slightly unusual style of presentation coming up next from Cymulate. So I'd very much like to welcome Mark from Cymulate to come and talk to you. And Mark will be joined by Terry Genvy from Cymulate, who's coming along virtually. We're placing our faith in the wonders of modern technology. Thanks, Mark.
There we go. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who made the trip down. If you did come from far, the people that have joined us virtually, thanks for taking the time out of your business days today to join us. So today I'm going to be talking about Cymulate, which is a breach and attack simulation technology, and how we use breach and attack simulation to confront supply chain attacks against ransomware, or ransomware attacks against these supply chains. For instance, this is, for example, the type of attacks that happen against SolarWinds or Microsoft as well. But that goes a bit further than just the supply chain as well. This could also be supply chain in terms of managed services that some of your companies are being offered from external companies as well. So the key problem with these type of services or supply chain attacks that happen against companies is knowing how secure or what is your security posture at the moment in terms of your security stack, and irrelevant of how mature that is. So essentially knowing your security posture is probably one of the most hardest tasks right now for your security teams, and knowing how resilient you are right now against ransomware attack is probably the #1 problem. For instance, if I were to ask you, if we launched the CDO malware that just hit Travelex, well, not just hit them, but hit Travelex about 2 years ago, how would your security teams react against that? How would your security stack react against that? And if it was actually able to execute against your security stack, what would have been the outcome? Secondly, to find out where am I most vulnerable within my security stack is also quite really hard these days, because not only some of your security stack might be coming from a third-party supplier, you might not know exactly what technologies have been implemented correctly. So knowing where you're most vulnerable is a key problem as well, and that's where these type of breach and attack simulation technologies can give you actionable insight into where your vulnerabilities lie and where the exposure within that stack is. Thirdly, are we protected against the latest threats? So once again, actually today there was a threat that came out that is called Lampion, and this is a attack against your sandbox solutions that bypasses your sandbox solutions with a single bit. So these type of attacks might not seem relevant because they don't hit a multi-billion size company, but to us smaller companies or in the medium to mid-market companies, these type of things are important to know, right? Because, for instance, we weren't in the news. That doesn't mean we don't have, special data that needs to be protected. So knowing if you're against or if you're protected against the latest threats is really important, and I can't stress that enough. And with these type of technologies like Cymulate, as mentioned today, they actually uploaded one of these latest threats, so they constantly updating the platform as well, so you can always know if you're secure against any threat that comes out. Just as an example, the CDO and Snake malware that hit Travelex and Honda, they were both uploaded onto the Cymulate platform within 8 hours from being captured. 8 hours sounds like a long time period, but if you think of the sophistication of these attacks, to be able to reverse engineer that attack, take out the malicious bit of it, and upload that onto a SaaS-based platform is a task on its own. So Cymulate's team are really good at doing that. Fourth is, how do I improve or how do I manage my incident management capabilities? This is really important. If you look at red teaming or blue teaming exercises, it's good to get all of that insight from these exercises that you carry out. But how do you prioritize the tasks for your security team? What do they need to go and close down first? Or what is most important in terms of the next actions that they need to go and look at? It's all good and well in changing a policy in a sandbox or on your email gateway, but that might not be as important as a misconfiguration on your firewall or WAF. So prioritizing where those incident capabilities are is really important for companies as well. How do I select the best products for my company? So with Cymulate, this is a really good use case we find as well. You might be ripping out some old kit or changing some parts of your security stack. How do you know you're actually making a business critical or a business choice that is actually good for you? So am I using the right money? Am I spending the money in the right place? And am I actually purchasing the right technology for what my business needs? So with Cymulate, you can, for instance, run a test against a firewall, the old one that you're replacing. You can then run that same test against B firewall, see how they match up against each other, and then say, all right, cool, we need to actually choose this because this is the best suit for our security stack and for our company. And then lastly, to convey this information over in terms of risk to the board, or whether that be risk or budget spend, for security professionals is a really difficult task, right? You can come into the board and you can say, you know, board member, we need X budget because we have a new firewall project coming out, or we need to buy a new endpoint solution, or for instance, we're looking at implementing SASE, but we're not quite sure, you know, how to tell them that this is why we need it. So first thing they'll ask you, do we need it? Why does it cost so much? And what's the difference between what we have right now? So Cymulate, with this technology, we can show them, all right, this is our posture score right now. This is what the posture score would be if we had implemented this specific technology. And this is where we've bettered our security posture. As you can see, for instance, we've brought our score down by 100, and I can explain the scores later on the stand if you guys do want to come by, but you will also see it on the demonstration that Terry will be showing us shortly. So these are some key use cases that are very difficult for security teams to actually carry out on a daily basis. Some of them do seem quite minute, but this is a big pain for security professionals, and with the breach and attack simulation technology, these are some things that we can help you guys with. And as Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? So if you don't know where you are right now, how do you know where you're going to be in the next 2 months? And that's also important when people compare this type of technology with pen testing as well. We're not trying to displace a pen test with simulated security posture testing. What we're trying to do is better your knowledge between those annual pen tests, because a pen test is just a snapshot in time. So these technologies help you stay on your security stack in between those as well. I don't want to teach anyone how to suck eggs. I'm sure we all are familiar on how a ransomware attack actually takes place. But this is just a bit of the thinking around how a simulated assessment works with Cymulate. So we'll start off on the outer perimeter. So this is where we'll try and start to build a target or automated attack. So this is your normal phishing attack, which is on a mass distribution basis. So we're going to try and send, for instance, 15,000 weaponized emails through your email gateway. We're going to see what's going to land. And then once we've done that, we've been able to gather some intelligence, right? So now we're starting to find out who's avid fisherman. So using social engineering, we're going to see Fred in finance loves clicking on an email. So maybe we should either put some additional security on his user, because we can send him to, you know, some training days, but we're all creatures of nature. So he might be having a bad day. He's going to click on something. Let's close his security down on his specific user. And that way we've started closing down our risk gap on the outer perimeter front. That doesn't mean that it's purely his fault. There might be some misconfigurations within our sandboxing solutions. Our email gateway might be allowing non-business critical file types through. By doing these small changes, we can already close down a massive risk within our security posture. Then we're going to start moving over to your web gateways, your email gateways, and your WAFs, where we're going to try and see what known vulnerabilities and exploits we can start using against your company, and then we're going to highlight those gaps as well. So essentially, that's where we start on an outer perimeter of an attack to try and get through, and then we're going to start just going through your general attack path, where we're going to try and get initial foothold into the network. So we've breached the outer perimeter. We're going to come in, and then we're going to start acting as a rogue insider. And this can be human-powered or automated as well. Most attacks these days are on an automated basis. Real-life sophisticated attacks, for instance, Snake or Cedo Ikobi, those were probably man-powered or human-powered because it's highly sophisticated. But you can buy automated phishing attack software these days off of the black market. So that would be then an automated attack. Essentially, we're going to then try and laterally move on the network, start to see what we can actually exfiltrate out of that, and then see if we can also deploy any type of ransomware onto your network as well. This is simply the modules or the attack type of modules that you can choose from on the Cymulate platform. Essentially, we can test end-to-end security validation on your platform, or on your security stack, sorry. Because this is a technology, actually testing a technology, there's no chance of human error, right? If you have a pen tester come in, they could maybe see some sort of policy out of place, but they will then tell the security professional within your company, oh no, that's okay, we've seen 6 other companies do it. Essentially, yes, it might not be a problem, but there's still the element of risk there. So Cymulate is a technology testing a technology. So if it's wrong, it's wrong. There's no in between, and Cymulate will highlight that. And in the reporting, which I'll be able to show you later on, and Terry will show you as well, in the reporting, you'll get that actionable insight, and it will give you the remediation. And if it's a no, it's a no. Essentially, that's the best way to keep your security stack closed down and safe. So it's a modular-based platform as well. So that's really nice because you can choose the type of attack vectors you want in respective of how mature your security stack is. Not all companies have the same type of security stack or have the same size of network as well. So they're not going to have a complete security stack against a complete kill chain, as you can see there. I'll go through the modules with you. These are the different attack type modules that you can choose from. And as mentioned, it's modular and it's for a number of unlimited assessments against that specific attack type as well. So first off, you get the recon module. What the recon module allows you to do is actually do some reconciliation work against your network. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to test and see what of your inside information is sitting outside. So, what passwords and usernames are sitting in databases on the black market, what, URLs of your company is sitting outside your specific network. And essentially, that's what hackers are going to do first. They're going to do a bunch of recon work against your network to see where we can start probing, what usernames we have, what passwords we can use to actually do some brute force work as well. From that, we're then going to move into your outer perimeter. So if you think of how an onion is built, it's pretty much the same way as these attack vectors are going to work. Your outer perimeter is going to be your email gateway, web gateway, and WAF. Essentially, on your email gateway, we're just going to see if that's configured correctly. We will then send, for instance, 15 to 16,000 weaponized emails to a dedicated mailbox. We're going to see what's going to land. It will auto-delete, send back to the Cymulate agent telling us, right, these are the number of emails that landed out of the 15,000. These are the type of ransomwares that were actually able to get through that gateway. And if someone had to be able to click on that or it was actually deployed, this is what would have happened. At the end of that, we'll tell you how to close that gateway down or close those security gaps down. Then we're going to test your web gateways, essentially what known malicious websites we can reach or what known malicious websites are trying to talk internally. Once we've been able to identify that, we then know how we can close that down and change the policies off the back of that. Pretty much the same, that's what we're going to do with your WAF as well. We're going to test your WAF, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, highlight what it's not doing correctly, and then give you some remediation advice on how to close that security gap down. Then we get the phishing module. The phishing module, this is for non-educational purposes except for the board or the security team. This is not going to educate the user within your company how to not click on a phishing email. This is going to highlight who in the company is an avid fisherman. So who is going to actually click on something. And that's a lot more that information is much better than actually sending someone to a training day for 1 or 2 days. First off, you don't have to pay them to sit in a room and not pay attention. Secondly, it will actually tell you who out of, the 200-300 employees you have actually know what they're doing and who's not clicking on stuff they're not supposed to be. As I mentioned, we're all creatures of nature. Anyone can be having a bad day, or anyone can be in a rush and click on that type of email. So it's more insightful to know who's going to do it continuously, and then we know, all right, let's put some added layer of security on that specific user as well. Then we're going to start going into the more sophisticated type of attack vectors that you can choose from on the Cymulate platform. These attack types are really insightful, and we'll go through that on the demo as well. But specifically, I'm going to skip one. The lateral movement assessment is superb. It's going to actually give you a visual representation of the blast radius if an attack had to land and laterally move on your network. That information, I believe, is something that's really hard for any security professional to be able to even explain to the board or explain to their security team. But if you can visually show someone how the attack spread on their network, what type of attack methods did it use? For instance, did it pass a token? Did it try and brute force through someone's passwords? If you can visually show that to someone, even on a segmented network, the information you can get off of the back of that is like gold. So with the lateral movement assessment, we're essentially going to see how we can laterally move across your network. And then it's going to also highlight exactly how that movement took place, and then visually show that to you so you can start closing that down. You might need to get a PAM solution, or you might have a PAM solution, but it's not configured correctly, or some users have incorrect privilege access that they shouldn't be having. Then I'll step one back. We'll go back to the endpoint assessment. So on the endpoint assessment, we're essentially just going to test all of your endpoints on the network. Do they have the correct security on top of them? Are their policies on? And for instance, is all the firewalls turned on all of your endpoints, for a simple example. We'll then also give you actionable insight as to which endpoints are vulnerable and how do you go and close those security gaps down on the remediation reports as well. Then lastly, on your typical attack vectors is the data exfiltration. Essentially here we're going to see what data we can touch and what data we can exfiltrate out of the network. We're not physically going to take anything out. We're just going to tell you we've been able to touch X file type or X database. This is how we touched it. This is what you need to do to ensure that we cannot do that again, or anyone that's trying to be malicious cannot do that. From those on the top there, I would say those are your most common attack vectors. Most organizations we speak to in the small to medium business space, they'll normally take, for instance, your email gateway, your web gateway, WAF, and endpoint, because that's where, most companies have security tools in place. If you are a bit of a larger sized organization, you'll be stepping away from that and actually going from endpoint, lateral movement, and data exfiltration. Because larger companies know, all right, we've probably got the best technologies in place for our WAF and our email gateway, and we've had them for years. We know all of those policies are in place. For us, it's more important to know if someone laterally moves on our network, what's that going to look like? And if they were able to get data out of the network, what data are they going to be able to touch? Then at the bottom there, you can see we've got 3 more attack vectors. These are super sophisticated. These are a lot more niche, and the deployment of these are slightly more, you need a bit more knowledge to actually deploy these, to be honest, because if you are going to be doing an immediate threats attack, this is, as I mentioned, where Cymulate have a team over in HQ where they're constantly scouring the dark web and dodgy places to pick up all of the latest attacks. These attacks get uploaded onto the Cymulate platform. You can then run them against your network. Now, this is really important, and this ties into, supply chain vulnerability and ransomware on networks, because essentially, if you don't know how safe you are against the latest attack, you're not going to be safe ever. This is not saying that, we're going to make it 100% safe for you, but if you can test yourself against something that came out yesterday, you're one step ahead today. So, as mentioned, there's constantly attack vectors being uploaded in the immediate threats module. For instance, that one this morning that bypasses your sandbox solution with a single bit. Then we have the full kill chain APT attack vector. This is a really great attack vector because you can actually design your own APT, so you can build your own advanced persistent threat from start to finish. So if you know historically or last year we were attacked by X piece of malware, if you were fortunate enough to capture that malware or you know what that malware looks like, you can pass that on to Cymulate. They can upload it onto your agent for you, and you can then execute that attack exactly like it happened. So you can see, all right, if it did execute, this is what the outcome would have been. We can then also see how our security stack would have reacted to that and how our team would have reacted to that specific attack as well. So that's a really great attack vector. We do see that attack vector quite a lot. Companies do like to know that they can build their own type of attack. It becomes a bit of a game for the security teams as well, because they can build sophisticated attacks in different ways. For instance, they can start with an endpoint assessment and then go directly to lateral movement. They don't need to go through the email gateways. So it's really powerful in terms of the use that you have on that specific attack vector. Then lastly, which is the latest attack vector as well that Cymulate have brought out, it's the purple teaming attack vector. I'm not sure if everyone knows what purple teaming is, but essentially it's a mixture of blue and red teaming. Normally you'd have the red team fighting the blue team, and you'll see how the two react against each other. With the purple team module, you're actually able to implement both teams together and run these on an automated basis against your network. This is a really great attack vector if you want to save time and money. Anyone that does or has done red teaming and blue teaming exercises would know that it's quite expensive. It takes a lot of time to plan, and you have to do it strategically, because if anyone else knows that you are doing these attacks or you're going to run this exercise, you are going to get a lot of false positives in the results from that. The purple teaming is also really good because you can then start testing, for instance, cloud infrastructures as well with this type of, or this specific module as well. So the reach and outcome that you can get from the purple teaming is not only time saving, it's money saving, and you actually get actionable insight directly off of the back of this type of assessment once it's run as well. The biggest question we want to cover these days is, how safe am I right now? No one knows that. I can almost guarantee if we had to launch any one of the latest threats against anyone here today, chances are it will get through. It's not to say that it will cause a lot of malicious harm, but if it can get through your email gateway but still get blocked by your endpoint, it's still gotten in. It still came through one piece of your security stack. So knowing that and closing that gap down is very important. Next, we just have an example slide of some of the immediate threats. So essentially, with the immediate threats module, as mentioned, you can run this on an automated basis. So you can actually select this to run as soon as that threats come out. So you don't even need to have an overhead or put a body behind a computer to run the Cymulate platform. This is not only for the immediate threats module, it's for all of the attack modules. You can run it on an automated basis on a schedule of your choosing. But the immediate threat is really important. I think in today's landscape, with immediate threats constantly changing, and people being able to not only purchase these type of ransomwares on the black market and deploy it against anyone really, but knowing that you're secure right now is really key. I think that can help a lot of security companies or security teams as well to stay on top of that security posture. That's something that's become more of from a nice to have or a nice to know to something that is actually really important and part of people's security strategies these days. At that point, I'm going to hand over to Terry, Unfortunately, we had to do this on a recorded session because Terry, first off, stays quite far, but also just because of the times we're in, and he's about to have a baby as well. So we just want to keep him as safe as possible in the time being. We can keep all technical questions for afterwards. I'm happy to come past the booth if you do have any technical questions or any commercial questions as well. At this point, I'm just going to step aside and we'll let Terry go do his thing.
Now, a little bit of overview about the platform architecture and the dashboard itself, a little bit of housekeeping. Now, as I said, the platform's SaaS-based. The reason why is we want to test our security controls in the same way that an attacker would. An attacker is highly unlikely to ask your permission to walk in through the door and put a device onto your network. So why should we? We also want to test across the entirety of the kill chain. Now, in terms of the dashboard, what we're seeing in the middle of the screen here are these 10 little circles. That's 10 of the 11 core modules. Each one of those has its own risk score based out of 100. The idea being the higher the score, the higher the risk. So at any point in time, I can look at this dashboard and know how safe I am right now, how effective my security controls are, but also how an attack could potentially compromise my organization. Where should I be focusing my budget, my time, my effort, and my resource? Now, the scores themselves are based on 3 frameworks. They're based on CVSS version 3, Microsoft Dread, and NIST. And we're also mapping everything that we do behind the scenes in terms of our attack components, our executions, our behaviors and techniques to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Now, what happens if our organization has multiple branch locations, multiple sites, multiple global entities? How can I benchmark each of those effectively? Well, the benefit of being a SaaS-based platform is we can support multi-tenancy. So if I do have multiple locations, I can actually start to benchmark each of those independently. Incredibly important if I'm connecting back to shared services or resources. If I want to see how effective my security controls are in my office in the US, for example, I can swap into that account. And in a few seconds, I'm going to get the same dashboard, but we can see that the scores are all set as 0. Now, this is simply because I just haven't run any assessments in that environment yet. I've not run any tests. But if I were to, I'm going to know how effective those security controls are if they're managed locally or if they're separate and different to the ones that I've got in my UK office. Now I'm going to swap back to my main account, and then we're going to talk a little bit about integrations as well. Now, the Cymulate platform is not dependent on integrations. We integrate with things such as endpoint tools, SIEM tools, vulnerability scanners to demonstrate impact, or to actually fine-tune the detection and prevention capabilities within those solutions. So if we want to know what integrations are in place, we can go to the integrations menu in the top right-hand side there, and we can see all of those that are available out of the box ready to go. As I said, with the endpoint tool, with the SIEM tools, we want to send our attack indicators when we're running our endpoint scenarios, and we want them to verify, are you seeing an event relating to that attack? Are you capable of recognizing that malicious behavior, that attack overall? And if so, what behaviors and techniques are you alerting us on? Now, if you're seeing the attack and you're not alerting upon it, then you've got a bit of a problem there, because actually something's going to land, run and execute. You're not going to get any visibility of that. And before you know it, that attack could potentially be successful. But if you're not getting any visibility of that malicious behavior or that attack scenario, is it possible for the SIEM or the endpoint tool to actually recognize those in the first instance? If it is, we're going to give you a brilliant way there of being able to fine tune those and demonstrate that detection and prevention going forward. Vulnerability scanning, great technology, but unfortunately quite common to get a lot of alert fatigue from that. There's a lot of things there that could be an issue. Now, we work in harmony of vulnerability scanning perfectly, because everything that we do is an issue. So if you want to prioritize patching, you want to understand impact, then we can start to demonstrate that in our lateral movement module and with our immediate threats module. How safe are we right now? If something could get into our organization, what would be the impact? How many devices or endpoints could potentially have been impacted by that attack without actually having to run it? Very, very powerful. Now, if we jump back to the dashboard, let's walk through the workflow and how to understand the reporting output from the platform. And for that purpose, we're going to choose the email gateway. So to run an assessment, the first thing I'm going to see when I go into the email gateway here are going to be templated items, common things that our customers tend to wish to look for straight away out of the box. Now, this templating method allows us to be as granular as we like. So if we're concerned about a specific attack type like ransomware, or we are wanting to tighten our controls against malicious Office templates, for example, there's templates for each of those. But what we're going to see first of all is Cymulate best practice. Now that's going to be the biggest and heaviest of the tests available. It's going to take around 2.5 to 3.5 hours to complete based on our configuration. But what it's going to do is give my email gateway a true workout of how effective it really is. Now this is a 3-stage assessment. It's going to calculate what file extensions are going to be permitted, blocked, or handled by tools such as sandboxing or CDR. Once we know what file extensions are permitted, we're going to send them once more, but this time we're going to start to embed code into them. And then the final stage there is once we know what file extensions are permitted, what type of code can actually be embedded and received within that mailbox, we're then going to start to send Cymulate versions of worms, ransomware, and Trojans that would make use of those. Because it's all well and good saying you must deal with this file extension, but let's evidence why you should be dealing with that file extension. Now, as we can see here, as I said before, the template methodology. If I run best practice and it demonstrates to me that I've got an issue with ransomware, I'm going to want to go and make some changes based on the output of the report for that, and we'll look through that in a second. But if I make those changes, the last thing I want to do is wait another 2.5 to 3.5 hours for that assessment to complete. In which case, if I'm specifically working against remediating against ransomware, and I choose that ransomware template, it's going to tell me there just under 2,000 emails, and it's going to take around 40 minutes. I can make my change, launch the assessment, go and get a cup of tea, and then come back to see whether it's been successful and it's worked as expected. Or if it hasn't, then I need to look into things a little bit further, or maybe contact the vendor. But to run the assessment, I choose the template I want to run. I choose my target mailbox, and this is going to be a mailbox that's set up solely for Cymulate to test with. It's not going to be testing human interaction, because if I launched up to 17,000 emails, which is the number that's available in best practice, at a user's mailbox, they're not going to be very happy for very long. Now, if we launch it against that test mailbox, should a payload manage to get through our controls and arrive into that mailbox, we're going to be capable of inspecting it to see what it looks like, whether it's been handled, reconstructed, or detonated anyway, and then removing it afterwards. Now, we can either schedule this assessment to run continuously. The benefits of continuous testing, I'm always going to know at any point in time how protected I am. If I'm susceptible to configuration drift, I've got people from a third party making changes on my behalf. Or maybe I've got people who are a little bit junior in role but don't quite have the level of knowledge they need to making these changes, and they've done it out of goodwill. Then if anything happens, I'm going to get visibility of this straight away by running continuously. But I can also manually hit launch at any time. So if I want to test different solutions on a bench in the lab and choose which one's fit for purpose when it comes to renewal time, I can do that as well if I want to. Many different use cases. But as soon as I hit launch, off it goes. The system will begin testing, and once complete, we'll get our latest risk score and we'll get the reporting information. Now, how do we digest that reporting? There's 3 different ways. You've got via the web interface, you've got exportable reports, which are tiered dependent on the level of role in the organization, and you've also got an API that can be used if you want to recover those results into a third-party system. But let's understand why I've got this score of 94. Well, based on my configuration, and I know this is because I deliberately permitted file extensions, which typically would be blocked, I've managed to successfully deliver 11,370 emails. Classic example of what would happen if somebody makes a change potentially they don't understand. The number of high-risk files that are arrived, what we're most and least protected from. And then underneath that, we've got each of the attack types we have tested as well. Now, if I scroll down through here and I have a look at the email policy and I hit the blue arrow at the end of the line, that's going to confirm what file extensions are blocked, permitted, and reconstructed. And this confirms what I've already know. I've permitted extensions, which should typically be blocked. So let's understand what type of attack would now make use of these based on that configuration. Now, if I have a look at the top of this list here, ransomware, 1,427 bits of ransomware, managed to get into that mailbox. Now I can view each of those payloads, but my consideration here, a bit like vulnerability scanning, is going to be alert fatigue. How do I prioritize things? How do I build a definitive plan of action whilst also being able to keep the lights on for day-to-day running? Well, I'm going to use these filters across the top. So I know that this environment I'm testing, predominantly Windows. Quite naturally, I want to deal with the high-risk items first of all. And I want to have a look at a file extension which I saw in the background there was permitted, which I thought was actually blocked. And then finally, I want to look for items that have been hidden inside another file extension at least once. Now, what that's done is that's taken that list down from 1,427 items to around 60. Now, that's a lot more manageable. And we now know that these are all following the .cab extension and they're all high-risk bits of ransomware. Now, if I scroll up to the top of this list, I head to the right-hand pane. Every time I click on one of these payloads, you're going to see that the description updates. So it tells me about the attack, it's reflecting. It's showing me the architecture and how that file's managed to get from my controls. And then we can start to talk about the mitigation device. My first consideration being, do I need these .cab files for day-to-day business? Now, if I don't, I can block that on my gateway, run the ransomware template, and if that change has been successful, in 40 minutes time, these 60 high-risk pieces of ransomware will no longer appear in this list. Just by getting that visibility about how well I'm configured, I'm now able to start to block these things that could make use of that configuration. Next scenario, do I need those extensions for day-to-day business? Do I actually need them for day-to-day activities? In which case, if I do, I should consider sandboxing technologies or CDR capabilities. Well, I might read this and I might think to myself, well, hang on about, I've got those in place. I already licensed for that. I already pay that subscription fee. Why does the Cymulate platform believe it's an issue? Well, all of these have arrived intact. When they've arrived through the controls, we've inspected them at the mailbox, and we've been able to ascertain that they haven't been rewritten, the payloads haven't been removed or changed or detonated in any way, shape or form. In that case, I need to go and investigate my sandbox in my CDR tool, similar to how I investigated my gateway around the .cab extension. Investigate those tools, make sure they're definitely set up to inspect and deal with these file extensions. And again, I want to verify that change has been successful. Run the ransomware template, come and sit back down, and if successful, the 60 high-risk piece of ransomware will no longer show in this list. Again, visibility is key. I now know, am I getting the most out of the solutions that I have in place? Final scenario we should really consider is what happens if I don't have any sandboxing or CDR capabilities? I need these files for day-to-day business. Now I've got all the ammunition I need now and the justification to build my business case. We need these extensions for day-to-day business. We need to invest in these solutions because at the moment, these pieces of ransomware can now get into our organization based on the fact we don't have the capability of detecting them or recognizing them. Now, as I said, there's also the exportable reports which can be used. And if I take a couple of steps back, on the right-hand side here, the big blue generate report button. Now there's three tiers to the email gateway. There's an executive high-level management report, and we'll walk through a quick example of that. There's a technical PDF, which is great for audit purposes. And then there's a technical CSV as well. CSV, for the person who's going to go and make the changes, it's gold dust. Every single payload, whether it's been successful, time and date stamps, architecture information, and then more importantly, the mitigation advice column. If I sort by whether something's been successful and the mitigation advice column, very similar to using those filters in the web UI, I'm going to be able to build an idea of where I can get some quick wins with some policy changes, but also I've now got a way of actually demonstrating why I should be making those changes. I can now quantify them. So let's have a look at the executive report, which will look a little bit like this. Now, the numbers in these reports are slightly different to what we saw in the UI. It's just a slightly older report I've got saved locally. And actually, we can see here, my score and my penetration ratio was worse. And our score of 99, higher the score, the higher the risk. Now, let's start to understand what's actually in this report. We were concerned about ransomware. Quite rightly, testing has proven we should be concerned about ransomware. 1,932 items arrived through my controls based on my configuration. But let's have a bit of a conversation about that configuration, because based on it, all of these other types of attacks were also successful. Okay, we've got a clear issue here of our email gateway. We need to focus our time, effort, and our resource. The next page, at a high level, what are we doing well? What aren't we doing so well? Obviously, as my score is terrible in this environment, I'm not doing very well at most things. Now, if we start to scroll through, you've got the option of benchmarking based on industry, fully anonymized. If you want an idea about how well you compare against other users in the same industry space, this is going to give you that level of granularity. You'll never see who they are, but ideally you want that line as low as possible to show that you're the best. What's more relevant though? Performance over time. If you think about traditional penetration testing, once or twice a year typically, maybe once a quarter. It's limited in scope, it's limited in time, because again, we need to keep the lights on for day-to-day business. We can't test absolutely everything. Well, we're testing across the whole kill chain now. We can give that level of visibility for the other 364, 365 days of the year, whatever it may be. Every time we run the assessment, you're going to get a risk score and you're instantly going to get access to the report. And hopefully you'll be able to demonstrate return of investment. We're actually being able to demonstrate that the solutions we're putting in place are having a positive impact. We should see our risk score starting to come down for each of the attack types. Once we're at a score we're happy with, we can baseline it. It becomes a different conversation. It becomes about assurance. How can we be assured that nothing's changed which has a negative impact and introduces a new level of risk? Well, of course, where we're running continuously, if something does change and it does increase our risk score, the platform's going to log and alert us to that activity, and then we can deal with it a lot quicker than waiting another quarter, another 6 months. The next page, how can I make the most out of the technology I've got in place just with getting that level of visibility and understanding how well it's configured? The platform here is telling me that these file extensions in red and blue are currently permitted. The file extensions in red are non-essential for most organizations. And if I block those file extensions in red, I can reduce my risk by 2/3. Just again, by visibility, understanding how well I'm configured, and actually building a policy and a plan of how to deal with those things once we can see what's actually happening. We can also see that some of these extensions have red and green dots next to them. That's telling me that since my last assessment, something's definitely changed. There's been some configuration drift here. So we previously blocked these or allowed them, and now they've been completely undone. Well, if we reduce our risk score by 68 points, as we're at 99 at the moment, that's going to get us to a score of 31. Now, what happens if we want to bring that score down even further? Then we need to consider other technologies such as sandboxing or CDR. If they are in place, they are not configured effectively to work with these file extensions. If they were to be, we'd actually see the file extensions listed under this heading here that are being reconstructed or detonated in some way. Or, again, to go to the final point earlier, maybe I just don't have that capability in-house. I need evidence why I should be introducing it. This is the evidence here. Now I'm going to skip through the next couple of pages because it's just an appendix outlining what we've sent for the assessment, because I want to get to the final page because, again, it will demonstrate to us the frameworks we're using to calculate this score. So we are using NIST, CVSS version 3 and Microsoft Dread, and we want to make sure we get our score as low as possible. So that's the high-level report. Now let's have a look at immediate threats. Now, the reporting we just saw for the email gateway is going to be consistent across all of our controls here. So from the endpoint, what could land, run, and execute malicious behaviors? Immediate threats is going to keep us up to date with the latest and greatest. So as I said earlier, to go back to that scenario, late in the afternoon, we get that phone call, are we safe right now? Well, we're going to be able to answer that now. If we click on any of these payloads, it's going to give us all the attack indicators used by that attack. We're going to have an integration with VirusTotal, so at a high level we can see which vendors have recognized it and those that have yet to do so. And if we jump back, we can see that this attack here is going to test our endpoint and our web gateway, just based on those icons. Some of those are going to be testing email delivery, and we also have those which have a little bug icon next to them. And if I scroll through, here's an example of one here, very prevalent in the media, the Microsoft Exchange tax. We know this attack uses CVEs to be successful. Now, once I've run that, that's going to confirm to me, yes, I'm protected, or no, I've got gaps. And if I've got the gaps, I've got the information on how I can start to remediate and deal with those gaps. And that could look a little bit like this attack here. For this attack, using Microsoft Exchange SQL servers, we have successfully delivered the attack payloads via the web gateway, and the endpoint didn't detect or recognize it either. So we've got some gaps it can get for our perimeter, and our endpoint isn't going to protect us. And we know it also uses these CVEs. So what do I do to actually prevent this from being successful? Well, if I click on any of these payloads, I'm going to have the architecture of the file. I'm also then going to have the hashes, sums, and signatures of that attack, the IOCs. Now I can take those, apply those onto my next-gen firewall or my proxy, and then I'm going to be able to rerun that assessment. And if that change has been successful, these files will disappear from this list. They can now no longer get through. Again, getting that visibility. Yes, we're susceptible to it, but we've taken a proactive testing, and now we can actually demonstrate we are now safe. Same for the endpoint. Our endpoint security, our tool of choice wasn't capable of recognizing those files. Let's block them manually, and then we can have the conversation with the endpoint vendor about why they weren't aware of those attacks. Now that's a great place to be. We now know if we were exposed that we can protect ourselves, and we're going to be able to stop that outbreak internally. But we also know that this attack uses these CVEs. And this is where the integration with something like vulnerability scanning will come into play. If I click any of these CVEs, and in this case we're integrated with Tenable.io, we're going to be able to demonstrate impact because it's going to pull through the list of machines that have that CVE present. Now in this scenario, brilliant. I've only got one machine that's affected. But if I had 200 machines in that list, even 50 machines, I now know that that attack would have successfully got from my perimeter. My endpoint would have protected those files from being written to disk and executed, and then I'd have X number of machines which would have been impacted. So if that question does occur, we can now say whether we're safe, and if we aren't safe, we've got an effective way of protecting ourselves, and then demonstrating afterwards that yes, we are now safe at that point in time. Now, at that point in time, that concludes the technical demo. Thank you very much for your time today.
Of the Cymulate platform itself, how it runs. As you can see, it is a very user-friendly platform. As mentioned, you don't need to actually physically put a human behind it as well. You can run it on an automated basis and have the reports come out to you automatically as well. If there are any technical questions or commercial questions, please do feel free to visit me at the booth. All the people that are virtually joining the event, if you do have any questions, please reach out to your EACS representative, and I'm sure you'll be in great hands there as well. Thank you everyone for coming today and taking the time to listen to us.
So